This meeting is being recorded.
So we're talking about the Christ. So we said, Jesus is more than the chrismated one, but he's also the chrism, and he embodies both the priest, the king, the the prophetism, or the office of prophet, king, and priest, and all three of those were anointed in the Old Testament, but Jesus fulfills all of those roles as the anointed one. So what about the woman with the alabaster box, who anoints Jesus? Isn't that something, that we still commemorate her? We still, and Jesus says she will be remembered. So we're not allowed to forget her, right? She is in the synaxarion of that day. What about that? Isn't that something how, for me, when I hear that story, it always reminds me, we keep coming back to the insignificant ones who do significant things in the scriptures, right? It's the fallen, corrupted one who is able to see clearly. It is the one that's annoying the disciples, that teaches the disciples. I mean, and this is what this reminds me of. I mean, every time I hear that story, it's like, wow, here's this regular woman who does something that's not regular. She's ordinary and does the extraordinary. Anyone?
She breaks a lot of social rules too. Taking out her hair, wiping his feet with it. Again, showing mercy. How does one show mercy to God? But she recognizes, she shows the mercy, and also the prophetic aspect of it, the anointing of his body. And yet some of the, that she's the woman that sinned. Some of the people, they talk about that, which is always emphasized, but she's the one that in her sinfulness could see the glory of God and react with it in her heart to respond to that love that she feels coming from Christ, accepting her in her brokenness. And what can she do but offer this ointment to him? There's nothing else that she has in her power to do.
Anyone else about this? I have some thoughts here.
For me, I think and sorry, my video in my office, I don't have a camera on my computer, so that's why I don't have video. But there's a basketball coach, Father Leo would like this if he was on, that said it's not about extraordinary people doing things. It's about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And I think, at the time, Christ was having issues with the Pharisees and the hierarchs of the Jewish faith that were missing the point on what they needed to be doing, and were more interested in about the processes and their positions and things. Similar to even our church today, no offense to you, Your Eminence, but I think it's a message that we as ordinary people can do extraordinary things for the glory of God. And here was this ordinary woman who showed this act to God incarnate as an ordinary person. It wasn't Peter that did it. It wasn't, the apostles that had been with Christ. And so it shows us that we can do the same thing in our daily lives, that we can be servants of God, and we can do extraordinary things for God and because of God, without being, a hierarch of the church.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but what's interesting to me about Father David, you mentioned that she broke a lot of rules, right? Social norms or social rules. I think Christ breaks the rules. It's not just her, right? Christ, God, broke all the rules. From the time he's born, he broke all the rules. He broke the rules that, kind of govern how God should act. I mean, there was no God, in that polytheistic world that would want to be born and then sacrifice himself, die on a cross, do all the stuff that he did. He broke all the rules. And I want us to be very clear about this. Jesus allows her to approach him and do this. He's not a victim. He's not caught off guard, right? He is not there and, suddenly she surprises him and, he doesn't know what to do and, he doesn't want to insult her. So he lets her continue. And no, this is almost invited. And I think we've got to be mindful of the fact that we ourselves create these walls that separate us from Christ. We do that. Okay? Christ broke those walls. He wants us to come close to him. He wants us to approach him. He allows us to do that when we're not supposed to. Whether it's because the social norms say you shouldn't, or because the spiritual rules, the laws say you shouldn't. Christ does not turn his back on us. And I think that that's very important. I know, Father David, you're a priest and you're a spiritual father, but sometimes I come across as a bishop people who have these extremely difficult penances that have been placed upon them. These austere, very austere rules that keep people from Christ rather than bringing them closer to him.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know if that's been your experience, but I remember as a young seminarian, and even as a priest, I have to say, my spiritual father would I was actually very upset that he hasn't been giving me harder penances and harder rules. And he said, if I give you these rules, it'll keep you from getting close to Christ. First of all, you're gonna keep breaking them. You're not gonna follow them. You're not able. And so what's the point? It's gonna actually separate you from Christ. And eventually as a pastor and now as a bishop, I get that this love, this mercy that Christ offers, he's drawing us to him, and we separate ourselves from him. And we're coming up on the Sunday of the expulsion from paradise, right? This coming Sunday. For me, this Sunday has never been about us being punished by God. It's our own self-punishment. And many times we do that and we think that that such punishment is due, that we should be punished that way. And I've always thought about, what does Adam and Eve do? Saint Irenaeus of Lyon, of Lugdunum, says their sin, the sin that caused them to be expelled from paradise, was not disobeying God, was not eating from the fruit. That's not what led to their expulsion. He said, which is interesting, right? Because that's what we normally think, right? Oh, don't eat the fruit. They ate the fruit, they disobeyed, so then God punished them. They were kicked out of the garden, right? And Saint Irenaeus says they would have been forgiven. God was ready to forgive. That was natural for God to forgive them for that. But what they did once they started to eat from the fruit is they hid from God. In other words, they separated themselves, and then they punished themselves. And he speaks about the covering of their bodies with fig leaves. He says that they took fig leaves because fig leaves hurt when you touch them. It creates a rash. If you ever felt a fig leaf, it's smooth on the top, and then it has like little pins on the bottom, like a hair. And if you rub that against you, it creates oftentimes an allergic reaction. It's like you start to scratch and itch. And so Saint Irenaeus says that this is what caused this separation, this expulsion. They did it to themselves. They did not turn to God. They hid from him and punished themselves, thinking that that's what God was about. And God says, who said that who says I'm a harsh God? Who told you this? Right? So this is an important part of our conversation here, because this woman who does this anointing for many should have been punished.
Mhm.
And yet Christ lets her do this. Now, John, you mentioned the regular people, and then you mentioned sorry, Your Eminence, as if I'm not regular. And I know what you were talking about, but I think that the conversation now maybe can look at what is our own anointing mean, our own anointment mean as Orthodox Christians, right? I mean, we were all anointed, we were all chrismated. I was ordained, Father David was ordained, but we were all chrismated. So I don't think that there is something that separates us. Father David and I are regular by virtue of being chrismated. What does this mean? If we were chrismated, if Christ is the chrismated one, right, the anointed one, and he is the chrism, right? Obviously, we're not the chrism.
Right.
Correct? So that's what's different between us and Christ. We're not God. We're not the chrism. We're chrismated. Christ is never an object, right? He is God.
For us Orthodox Christians, the chrismation begins the process of theosis, so union with God. So the closer we get to Christ, the closer we can experience his empathy and his co-suffering perfect love, and the more we can share that love with others, and also love ourselves in a selfless kind of way. So the goal ultimately is theosis, and chrismation begins that process. And the degree to which one acquires theosis is in accordance with his or her personal ascetic struggle and devotion to the church, but we're all, God willing, acquiring it to one degree or another.
Okay, so Father David, you have some doggies there. They're
Sorry.
yeah,
Sorry.
it's okay. So yeah, Pablo, I think Paul, the idea of theosis, I mean, we won't get into that. It's very deep, but I will say, think about it not in terms of a word that's so abstract and philosophical and deep theological, but think about it in terms of love, right? So if God is love and theosis is becoming one, united with love with God, then what does it say about how we live our lives as mini Christs?
Well, so that's what Christian means, is little Christ, and so we're supposed to be little anointed ones, and we are through the physical act of chrismation, but we should live that out. And I think of the gospel reading of the debtor who has so much debt that he will never be able to pay it off, and it gets just forgiven, and then he, rather than being thankful for that, he goes out to another debtor, a debtor to him, and says, "Pay me back all the money you owe me," and doesn't. So he punishes him, gets him thrown in prison. So that's the negative way. We shouldn't be like that. We should be more like the king that forgave the debt.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else about how to be mini Christs?
If by virtue of our chrismation, we take on Christ, okay, we put on Christ, as Paul says, and we become a priestly people. The mission of, if you will, the laity then too is to become priests in their own right, to minister to each other and to the world as well. Not just the bishops or the priests, but the entire community, because they are sealed with Christ. They have not received the grace of the priesthood or the bishop, but it is still important that all people, sorry about that, it's the puppy, have the obligation because they have put on Christ. So that's just the importance to emphasize for all of us is our mission is to reach out, to bring others to Christ, not just the priest, not just the bishop, not just, the patriarchs. It's all of us involved with it because of the chrismation. Is that?
We're a royal priesthood, right? We are
Exactly.
part of the
Royal
royal
priesthood.
priesthood. What I think about, and does anyone not have a chance to say anything? Maybe someone wants to speak and we're not letting you. No?
My only remark is how Christ was drawn to the marginalized people of society and how difficult it is for us to do that.
Hmm. Well, Jim, that speaks to the gospel that we heard this past Sunday. Right? That when I think of us being many Christs, right? Or part of the priesthood of Christ, I think of exactly what you just said, ministering to others like Christ ministered to others. And that's what, is that what he told people, how we will be judged by whether or not we have done what he did, whether we offered mercy to others like he did, whether we fed the hungry and clothed the naked and so forth. And why do you think it's difficult for us to be among the marginalized? Did anyone, why is that? Why is it so difficult?
I think it's hard because it reminds us of what we have. It reminds us of the guilt of not giving it away, I suppose. At least that's the way I feel.
Mhm.
I think we relate better to people who we have in
Like, I'll let him finish. I'll let Jim finish.
Hold on. Give me one second. Paul, I think Jim was trying to say something. Jim, what were you
Yes.
saying?
I think we feel more comfortable with people who we have more in common with.
Okay. Paul?
Yeah, that's more or less what I was going to say, that sometimes we're afraid of what other people think. Sometimes we're afraid to associate with some people, even if we like them, but if other people have a bad opinion of them or think the people whom we like are not terribly hip, we get kind of embarrassed, and we don't always like to stick up for the little guys sometimes. But that's what Christ always did.
So I think we have to be clear that, first of all, Christ went to all people, right? He didn't just go to the marginalized. I know it's the stuff, this is what we tend to, that's what stands out because it was so unordinary, right? It was not the thing that you would expect. The harlot, the person with the issue with the woman with blood, the sinner, the tax collector, whatever, whether it's Zacchaeus or even Judas, right? But he was also there. He offered what he had to those who were not on the margins, right? I think one of the biggest challenges we face as humanity is that we forget, that what St. John Chrysostom reminds us, when he says, we're just, worms and, rotten flesh. At the end of the day, this, we are nothing special. We like to think that there is us, and we live our lives like there's a us versus them, that it's us who have something, right, that are a certain way, and them who have less than or are not like us, right? But how much doesn't it make us feel like this is a normal group? Like, this is your parish of Sheboygan. Father David has joined this group, right? We are a community here. This is us. I have joined you. We have created a family unit here. We understand each other and respect one another. But aren't there groups that would look at us and say, these guys are the marginal ones? Right? I mean, we are, if you think about it, we're a minority of minorities in terms of a faith group. We do weird things. I mean, the early Christians were thought of being, vampires or, people that eat flesh and blood, or something. They were misunderstood. They were the ones on the margins. And, here we are, and we act like, others treat us the same way, and we treat others that way. I mean, somehow we people like to see themselves as being very different than the low man. No one wants to be the low man, the little guy. And so what we end up doing is we end up treating that little person, the one that's very different, very sinful, very dirty, very poor. You fill in the blank, very uneducated, very hungry, the one who's not like us, so different. And then we say we can't approach him because we don't relate. But inevitably, like, if we look at it from a spiritual standpoint, we are all hungry, and we're all sinful, and we're all naked, and we're all, imprisoned. And this is the interesting thing about that passage. Like, I don't know that Jesus was necessarily talking about seeing somebody who was in a hospital when saying, I was sick and you visited me. There are people who are sick and they're not in hospitals. There are people who are in prison and slaves to things, and they're not in prison, right? And there are people who are hungry and yet they have so much food around them, and we don't care, and we're not caring for these people. And so we are the ones that are on the margins, and we have to remember that is why, if we don't care for one another, then we're not little Jesuses, little Christs. We're actually not fulfilling our chrismation. We're not fulfilling our own priesthood when we don't care for those in need. And those in need is not just the homeless person under the bridge. It could be a parishioner in among us now. It could, we're all in need. Anything else? Any other comments, or someone wants to share further?
I was just thinking about the very vivid quote by St. John Chrysostom about us being just rotten flesh and worms. And, chrism is usually associated with the Holy Spirit. And I was thinking how, Adam in Hebrew really means dirt. And so, God took, dirt and then breathed into it. And that is, inspired it, really put his spirit into it. And, without God's spirit, we're just dirt. We're just, rotting flesh and worms.
Yeah. And you can be rotten flesh and worms and smell really good. Right. I mean, that, in other words, we can be spiritually rotten.
Yeah.
And we can be clean, and we can be content, we can be in shape physically, but we can be rotten.
The outside of the cup can be clean.
Yes.
Christ called the Pharisees whited sepulchres. They're clean on the outside, but all rotted in dead men's bones on the inside.
That's Holy Tuesday night, isn't it? Was that Tuesday night, Holy Tuesday night's gospel reading? Woe to you, Pharisees and scribes. Yeah. Anyone else? Gus, Linda?
Is there success in just sheer trying to do Christ's will?
Is there a success, you asked?
Yes, and Lynn and I were just talking about this. Is there just the sheer attempt to do what's expected of you as a Christian? Is that all we can expect of ourselves?
is that success?
Well, I think the word success is very loaded.
Yes, that's not the right word.
No, but I think what you're trying to ask is it enough for
Enough.
us to attempt to do God's will, right? I mean, first, just trying to discern God's will, discern it, struggling with it, fighting it sometimes is part of the process. It's not we're not machines, we're not on autopilot. God does not create us and say, here, you're programmed, and if you execute this command successfully to the end, right, you've succeeded. I think God knows. God knows the moment he creates, and that's what makes creation an act of love. God knows when he creates, the world is less than perfect, is less than him. And he knows what's going to happen. He knows, he is all-knowing. He's all, he understands that creation is not the creator. And yet he creates, because there's something beautiful in the act of creating. It's a sharing of love, the pouring out, and allows us to create as well, to be part of that, to experience that love, even though we're going to struggle with the will, with the purpose that he wants to see us fulfill, right? His will. We don't know it. We struggle with it. That's why we have a spiritual father. We work with one another. We try to discern, and it's not just a spiritual. We had a YAL conference, and we were talking to the young adults that my advice to them was, have a lot of who's in your life, right? Someone said, how do we do this? How do we do God's, God, how do we fulfill God's will? And I said, well, don't worry about how. Have a lot of who's. It's about who, not how. It's a great book. I recommend it for you all. It's for entrepreneurs, but it offers a different way. It offers a Christian way of seeing life, right? And the author wrote it for people who are business people and entrepreneurs and so forth. But there's a lot of it's grounded on Christianity. It's not about figuring out how you're going to do it on your own, but it's having a lot of people who will help you, shape you, sharpen you, guide you, lift you up when you fall, help you discern what's in front of you, and kick you in the pants sometimes, or congratulate you sometimes. And it could be your spiritual father, of course. It should be. That's somebody who should be one of your who's, but it can be a friend. It should be your spouse. Right? Isn't that why marriage, the purpose of marriage is salvation? That's what the purpose is. When people say, why do people get married? Why should have kids? Should they not have kids? Is it this? Is it that? It's the purpose of marriage in essence is salvation of one saving the other, helping. That's a who in your life, right? Your brother, your sister, your parents, your friends, your enemies even. Our enemies are who's. Sometimes it's our enemy that points things out to us. It's our biggest critic who's going to open our eyes. And so I would say, Gus and Linda, trying is absolutely, that's a lot though. Don't think about it like, oh, I tried and trying and I just gave up and I got tired and I did my best. That's not good, right? I tried and I failed is better, right? And we're always going to fail. That's a given. But you're trying to hit the mark. Sin amartia, you're trying and you're missing. But that's okay. At least you tried. Yes. So you didn't get the bullseye this time. It's okay. God knows why you didn't hit the bullseye. And he forgives you. He's going to give you another dart so you can try again. He's not kicking you out of the bar. You can still try again, play darts, right? And that is absolutely enough. When you approach, our fulfilling our invitation, our calling in that regard, yes, then I would say it's enough. But it's when you struggle. We need to struggle every day. There are going to be days when we're going to be so despondent and we're going to feel like, hey, this Christ stuff, and I don't want to be a little Christian, a little Christ. I'm just done with being Christian. And I get that. And it's easier not to be a Christian, right? It's easier to say, I just, I want to be mediocre. I want to be free. I want to be rebellious. I don't know. Just don't make me a Christian. I'm done with Christianity. When people walk away from Christianity, that's a struggle. That's part of the struggle. How now do we serve as important who's that can help bring them back? I think so. Just we can try our best, and rest assured that even when we fail, God is going to pick us up. And isn't it funny? Like I don't know how, and we could talk about science and how old the universe is and how old, when humanity appeared. This isn't a conversation about Adam and Eve, evolution and so forth, right? But just like, think about how many generations have been attempting to do God's will, right? How many generations of chrismated people there have been, and God hasn't grown tired of us. It's like, I don't know. He's got a lot of patience, and he knows that we're going to struggle and fail. He still chrismates us. He still anoints us. And that says something about the ointment that he is, the substance, the essence of his anointment, his ointment. It doesn't run out, doesn't discriminate. It doesn't, set, these unreachable, demands. What God asks of us is attainable, specifically because he's there with us. Anything else, Father David? You want to offer some closing remarks, or no? Well, you're muted, but that's okay. And I want to ask this group to do a couple of things. I want this group to grow. Okay, so you are being invited to be Christ's and go and find people to anoint and bring them here to our little fellowship. I love it. Every week there's, new faces and stuff, but I really, maybe, and I know you put the ad out there to showcase the parish, right? For your open house, which I really commended when I saw that. It was very bold and the right thing to do. But I don't know if there's a way to take out a small ad somewhere and advertise this group.
Well, I would say what I did 2 weeks ago is I actually emailed about 12 of my coworkers and friends that I thought might be interested. Because I think a personal touch might, we all can evangelize to just the people that we know that aren't necessarily Orthodox, but so these are all non-Orthodox coworkers and friends, and I got a couple of replies. Oh, thank you for sharing, and I'll try, but so far no one's joined. But I think rather than just a cold, newspaper advertisement where it may seem intimidating, if we just all reach out to just the people in our lives and maybe just send, I copied the links from our emails and sent that along, and copied the link to the video series on the Metropolis website and just sent that with my email. So I think maybe if we all just individually do that.
Yeah, you can, feel free to do it any way you want. I mean, I just saw when you guys when you issued a cold invitation to your church, there were a lot of seekers that were in there. I mean, there were people that you didn't know. Those are the people in there. I mean, it wasn't your friends for the most part. It wasn't the friends who came. It was people who saw this ad and were intrigued and curious. So whether you want to go and print out a flyer, post it up on the coffee shop, and someone, can, download a QR code, I don't know, whatever, whichever way you want to do it. I want us to make sure that the conversation is growing. I really want to learn from everyone else's experience and knowledge. And so I think we also want to share with others and grow and learn from them as well. So, you know, if you want to email your friends, you know, parishioners from, you know, Naples or Father David, if you want to share whatever you want. I mean, this is not meant to be, you know, just it was for making sure that the people at Sheboygan St. Spirit on Church knew. But just like Ryan invited you, Father David, it's great, you know, this is open. I mean, I don't know, have all the answers, and it's a great conversation to have with as many people as possible. So that's number one. Number two, there will likely be a new Zoom invite. Okay, so that and let me actually stop sharing, stop recording rather. Hold on, give me a second.